It is 40 years since Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, the moment that sparked Britain's biggest military mobilisation since the Second World War, with the islands recaptured 2 months later in June 1982. It was a transformative moment for the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who went on to win 2 further elections. And it was a conflict with a lasting legacy for those who served, as Alan Little now reports.
Every year at this time, he says, I change. The war comes back.
There was just a wall of fire. It was an horrendous, tracer-filled, bullet-filled mountain.
Mike Carr was a 19-year-old paratrooper. He fought in the battle to take Mount Longdon, overlooking the capital, Port Stanley.
We went back to basics of war. It was back to bayonets, back to grenades. It was back to guys on the ground and hand-to-hand fighting. It's the reality of war. With all the modern technology, someone has to still go and clear that ground. And that's what we did, and I believe we did a brilliant job.
An experience like that changes you, doesn't it?
Totally.
Argentine forces seized the islands on April the 2nd. Their poorly trained, mostly conscripted soldiers had no idea what was coming. Within days, Britain began assembling a huge naval task force. Military commanders warned the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, that a war to retake the islands could cost many hundreds of British lives.
Margaret went right round the table and asked each member to give their opinion. And I remember when it came to my turn, I said, if the fleet doesn't sail, this government will fall. And I think that was an accurate perception of the fragility of Margaret's position.
It is easy to forget now how unpopular Mrs. Thatcher had become before the Falklands. The risks of going to war were huge, but British sovereignty had been violated by an act of aggression, and for her, the imperative was clear.
The government has now decided that a large task force will sail as soon as all preparations are complete.
The first ships set sail on the 5th of April. The war began at sea. A British submarine sank the Argentine battleship General Belgrano on May the 2nd. 2 days later, the Argentines struck the Royal Navy destroyer HMS Sheffield. When they landed on the islands, British troops had to walk 90 miles across rough ground, carrying 50-pound packs. A new verb entered the language, to yomp. 255 British servicemen were killed, more than 600 Argentine. It now took just 3 more weeks to defeat an ill-equipped Argentine force. The troops returned to a different Britain. The 70s had been a bruising and demoralising decade of economic decline and industrial strife. A new sense of pride now swept the country. It transformed Mrs. Thatcher's standing. She would govern for the rest of the decade and radically reshape Britain's economy and society. Many of the men who fought that war live with it still. It was the defining experience of their lives.
The guys in Three Para, it's a brotherhood. And once you've joined and fought like we did, you're always a member of the brotherhood. You know, my wife has said on some of the reunions we've been on, you're just young guys again in old bodies, which we are.
Alan Little, BBC News.